morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. Welcome to this press conference, Zero Waste Wins from Africa to Asia to Latin America. My name is Sonia Astudillo, Global Climate Comms Officer for GAIA. For those of you who do not know GAIA, GAIA is a network of grassroots groups as well as national and regional alliances representing more than 1,000 organizations from over 100 countries. With our work, we aim to catalyze a global shift towards environmental justice by strengthening grassroots social movements that advance solutions to waste and pollution. Today's press conference is happening at a very important juncture. This week and next week is the second Climate Week and the Africa Climate Summit at Addis Ababa in Ethiopia. And in a few months in November, the national leaders and civil society organizations will gather in Belém for COP30, where we will push for stronger, more ambitious climate plans to be implemented. While all this is happening, there are ongoing battles against proposed waste burning technologies or WT incinerators in Quezon City, Philippines, Bagueri, Brazil, Lagos, Nigeria, and in Addis Ababa in Ethiopia, to mention just a few. To give us an overview of what is at stake for the Global South, we have Mariel Vilella, GAIA Global Climate Program Director. Mariel, the floor is yours.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for being here with us today. I'll take the chance to give some context. Of course, the context is that the second Climate Week is happening in Addis Ababa throughout this whole week. And this event is going to play a key role in shaping negotiations and commitments ahead of COP30 that's going to happen later in November. And importantly, this event, the second Climate Week, brings together governments, national governments, subnational governments, investment banks, that will be discussing strategies and set the stage for COP30. And importantly, also key participants in this second Climate Week are the environmental NGOs and local organizations from Ethiopia. And so I'm very pleased to mention that Neil Tangri from GAIA and Eskedar Awgichew, who are here with us today, are in person in Addis Ababa, and they will be participating in the second Climate Week, participating and also presenting as part of the agenda. And so we're very pleased that we bring voices from civil society to this important negotiation. So this time, the focuses of this second Climate Week is precisely on waste management and circular economy. And particularly, it will be looking at scalable, practical solutions. And these discussions are very important because they can really influence urban infrastructure policy, urban mitigation policies, and funding priorities. And so this is a great opportunity for governments around the world, but especially in the Global South, to see the waste sector as such an important ally in the fight against climate change and as such an important field for climate solutions. And so being the focus, we expect that one of the key major policy debates that will emerge will be about the efficiency and the adequacy of incineration technologies versus zero waste strategies. And as we will hear today in the report that GAIA is presenting, zero waste approaches can achieve far greater methane emissions mitigations in the short and in the long term, and support much better just transitions for communities. But we also expect to see regional case studies, such as the controversial waste-to-energy incinerator in Addis Ababa, which really is a cautionary tale for other Global South countries and cities that are considering investments in waste-to-energy incineration. Because as it's the case in Addis Ababa, but it's also been the case in many other places, incinerators fail to deliver the promised energy, displaced local waste workers, produce toxic ash, and cost millions annually. So in fact, incinerators are a real threat to climate and just decision outcomes. And just to give you some numbers about the case in Addis Ababa, this because precisely this second climate week is happening in Addis and Addis. So the more important that we explain what is the situation in the city, the incinerator, the waste to energy incinerator in the city was promoted as a groundbreaking solution, but the promises have fallen way short. It was designed to treat 1,400 tons a day, but it handles only 400 to 700 tons, and it produces half of the promised energy and electricity. Part of this is because most of the waste is organic. And so organic waste is wet, it has very low calorific value, and therefore it needs extra fuel to burn properly, which means that it becomes a very inefficient source of energy, a very inefficient and inadequate way of dealing with municipal solid waste. Not only that, but also it displaces the local workers, the local waste pickers that are in many cities around the world, the de facto recycling system, and it produces 85 tons of toxic waste, toxic ash daily. So the waste actually, it reduces in volume, but it still remains a very significant amount of toxic ash that needs to be dealt, that needs to be put somewhere. This is not cheap, all this process. In the case of Addis, it costs more than 6 million a year. And this is usual for incinerators, is the most expensive way of dealing with waste. So these funds would be much better spent on composting, on recycling, on zero waste strategies, which are solutions that truly benefit communities, reduce emissions, and align with sustainable waste management. We're very much looking forward to the discussions this week in the second climate week, and we will be participating with all the wealth of experience of our network throughout the world. Looking forward to connecting with everyone in Addis. Thank you so much, and passing on to you, Sonia.
Thank you so much, Mariel, for giving us an overview of what's at stake for the Global South. Now, joining us to talk about GAIA's latest report, Zero Waste as an Effective Climate Strategy, Avoiding Warming Trade-offs from Incineration, one of GAIA's four-part technical guidance series for policymakers and financiers on fast action on waste methane, is Neil Tangri, GAIA Science and Policy Director. Neil.
Thank you very much, Sonia. It's a pleasure to be here. As you just heard Mariel saying, waste is rising to the top of the international agenda. And much of that reason for that is because of methane that is generated in landfills and dump sites. Methane has a very high impact on the climate over short periods of time. It's more than 80 times as potent as carbon dioxide in trapping heat. But it also has a very short lifespan within the atmosphere. And so reducing methane emissions is actually one of the fastest ways we have to reduce climate heating. And this is reflected in a variety of global commitments, such as the Global Methane Pledge, the COP29 Declaration on Reducing Methane from Organic Waste. So governments are waking up to this, the importance of methane in particular, the importance of methane from the waste sector. And it's about 20% of anthropogenic methane is from the waste sector. Unfortunately, with this renewed emphasis on methane, sometimes there gets to be a bit of a methane tunnel vision, where people forget that while solving for methane, we also have to keep in mind a whole array of other issues, including other climate issues. And so we see this misalignment reflected in the fact that almost all of the climate finance that's going into the waste sector is going into burning waste, either in incinerators or in cement kilns, and not into really the better approaches for dealing with waste and avoiding methane. Next slide, please. So we launched this investigation to look at what is the impact of incineration versus zero of, say, of infrastructure, which is, the 30 to 40-year range. And in particular, we wanted to ask the question that evens out the sort of temporal differences between methane and carbon dioxide. So as I said, methane is very powerful, but it has a short residence time in the atmosphere. Carbon dioxide is less powerful, but it remains in the atmosphere for centuries. And so sometimes when we try to compare these, we do it in terms of global warming potential, but then you have to just. So we took a different climate, not just emissions, but how much warming do these cause? And so we used two sophisticated models to get at that. The SWEET model built by the US EPA estimates emissions, both methane, and then the FAIR model is a climate model that estimates the temperature impact from a certain impulse of emissions. And so this way we're getting really to what we care about, which is how much are these different waste strategies impacting global temperatures. And so we analyzed 3 different scenarios: business as usual, which is mostly disposal, mostly dumping, incineration, and zero waste practices. And we took in conservative in the sense of sort of reasonably high ambition, but not crazy high. And we looked at 3 different cities: Lagos in Nigeria, Barueri in Brazil, and Quezon City in the Philippines. Next. So I'll just jump straight to the findings. We found that zero waste consistently outperforms incineration in reducing warming. In 2 out of the 3 cities, incineration reduced warming orders of magnitude more. In 1 city, it was about 40%. There are multiple reasons for that. One is that incineration does tend to avoid methane emissions, but it increases carbon dioxide emissions. So whatever benefit you get in the short term ends up being outweighed in the long term by the increased carbon dioxide. The other thing is that when incinerators are proposed, particularly in major cities, they are usually not high enough capacity to build 4 incinerators, 4 very large incinerators to handle all of its waste. And Lagos wouldn't require 8. And so what that means is after you spent hundreds of millions of dollars building one incinerator, the rest of that waste is still going to the landfill or the dump site, incinerators per city. Next. So a couple of other findings. Zero waste strategies minimize both methane and carbon dioxide emissions. By keeping organics out of the landfill, methane emissions are minimized, and by focusing on recycling, you can actually reduce carbon dioxide emissions in manufacturing and primary material sectors. And that difference, because it's affecting both methane and carbon dioxide, it has a positive impact both in the short and the long term. And the longer you go on, the more significant that impact is. Next slide. So here you can see the chart on the right. This is for Lagos, Nigeria. That dotted yellow line is business as usual, and the other 2 scenarios are measured relative to that. So the red line is the incinerator, and you see that it's very, very similar to business as usual. In fact, after about 30 years, the total warming impact is even worse than current practice. And that blue line that's diving down, that shows the relative cooling from zero waste. The y-axis may be a little hard to read there, but it is microdegrees Celsius. And that is global temperature impacts from this one city. Next. So Quezon City shows a very similar scenario. There's a slight benefit from reduced methane emissions in the short term, but it's very small and it doesn't last. Zero waste does much better. And for example, in this case, zero waste is equivalent to taking 11 million cars off the road in terms of the emissions impact. Next slide. So Barueri is a slightly different situation, and I could go into the details of that. It's a bit of a complicated situation, but this is sort of the best case scenario, really, incineration and use waste, where we see, more emissions reductions and greater cooling from the zero waste approach. Next slide. So zero waste has the advantage of avoiding the methane. You have methane. When you have incinerators, you have carbon dioxide. When you have zero waste, you can minimize both. Incinerators also displace recycling, which ends up, it's problematic for many reasons, including the loss of livelihood for informal sector workers, but also because that tends to increase greenhouse gas emissions. And of course, the benefits accumulate over time. Another really important point here is the scalability of zero waste. You can do zero waste at the neighborhood level, you can do it at the regional level, at the city level. But when you build an incinerator, you can't just throttle back and forth depending on how much waste is going in. Once you built that incinerator, you have to feed it. And if you need a second or a third or fourth incinerator, you can't just kind of plop them in one of those. So these are really fixed infrastructure that necessitate a constant flow of waste, whereas zero waste is really scalable. Next slide. So here's our call to action. We really want to climate finance to be focused community solutions that integrate waste pickers and that are based in community. It's important that funds, here we're talking at Climate Week about the need for finance to support climate solutions as well as to fund basic services. And that's exactly what zero waste does. And it's important that those funds flow directly to the practitioners of zero waste rather than to large engineering firms that are going to try and drop in very expensive technology that ends up being more polluting. And part of zero waste is harder once you got lock-in through an incinerator. So next slide, please. All right, well, I will hand it over to Sonia then. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Neil, for this thorough explanation. For everyone watching, you may download the report at no-burn.org/tech-guide-waste-methane. As mentioned earlier, this report is part of the 4 technical guidance series for policymakers and financiers for fast action waste and methane. Now, to share reflection on what Neil just presented and the overview from Mariel, we have 4 panel reactors, starting with Eskedar Awgichew of Eco-Justice Ethiopia. Eskedar.
Thank you, Sonia. I hope you can hear me okay.
Yes, Eskedar.
As the earlier presenters mentioned, when we are talking about solving the problem of waste, we have to take into consideration what we are working with, especially for countries, for cities in Africa, who definitely have a growing challenge that comes from waste management because the population in their urban areas are growing exponentially. We need to look into exploring solutions, but those solutions need to be compatible to the context we have on the ground. Unfortunately, solutions that are now currently being financed through, including using climate finance, are coming in the shape of modern technologies such as incinerators, which are extremely expensive to build, very expensive to run, and also does not add value into the local value chain. And in comparison, you have opportunities like zero waste, where you can actually have a waste management system built to add value, both in terms of exploiting more resources out of the waste that is generated in urban areas, and also in terms of creating jobs and strengthening already existing community ties on the ground. Therefore, it's very important for new cities and growing cities to explore a situation where they actually create a meaningful and compatible waste management system that goes more in line with zero waste rather than technologies that are expensive and hard to maintain, like incinerators. As Mariel mentioned in the beginning, in my own city, Addis Ababa, we saw this come into reality because when we decided to build the incinerator, we did not have the money for it as a city or a government. So the government actually borrowed 120 million USD to build this infrastructure that was supposed to generate electricity and solve our waste management problems at the same time, but it managed to deliver on neither. We still have a challenge now to run the incinerator as a power generating facility. So it's more serving as just a basic incinerator because for that amount of investment, we could have generated a significantly higher amount of electricity if that money went to hydroelectricity, solar, or wind. So incinerators do not also make sense from the perspective of energy generation, especially in the African context. Whereas, as I mentioned earlier, zero waste would be the much better option to go because it is compatible and it can result in better yields. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Eskedar. So the keywords were meaningful and compatible local solutions that take into consideration the situation on the ground. Now moving on to Weyinmi Okotie from GAIA Africa. Weyinmi.
Thanks, Sonia, and once again, thanks, Neil, for that fantastic presentation. So for me, what this publication makes very clear and what's especially relevant for us in Africa is that zero waste consistently outperforms waste to energy, both environmentally and economically. So I think we really need to place some emphasis economically because most times it just feels like we're only speaking from the angle of the environment, but economically, zero waste outperforms waste to energy. So then that makes it a no-brainer for scale up or a model for scale up. And unfortunately, climate finance, which should be helping our climates. So climate finance in the waste sector has been majorly used to finance these four solutions, waste to energy incinerators. For me, my worry as an African or as a Nigerian is that most African municipalities have two major challenges, waste challenges and also the issue of power. And so they fall prey to these companies coming up with these false claims about incineration being the solution, being a silver bullet solution. But that's cities soon realize that that is not the truth. I hope that in Africa, our governments, our policymakers will be exposed to this information as early as possible to avoid being praised to this false solution. So in Africa, where municipal budgets are tight and waste streams are still dominated by organics, so zero waste is not just a climate solution, it's a smarter development choice. It's about protecting public health, supporting livelihoods and ensuring that our cities grow sustainably. So the message is simple. If we want climate smart, job creating and scalable solutions, zero waste is the path forward, not incineration. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Weyinmi. That's a smart choice. Okay, now from GAIA Asia Pacific, we have Brex Arevalo.
Thanks, Sonia, and hello, everyone. This report comes at a very good time We have been seeing in the past year and also this year a growing number of different researches, different evidence showing the impacts of waste to energy incineration and showing its negative effects. Just a few months ago, we had a report on air quality coming out, which featured Dumaguete in the Philippines, Awgichew in Nigeria, and Surabaya in Indonesia. And just as Neil mentioned earlier, we took an approach where we looked at different sides of the coin, not just looking at climate per se or having a methane tunnel approach, but really looking at air quality in general, looking at health impacts, looking at environmental impacts. Looking at this report, I'm reminded of another report that came out 2 years ago by the Climate Policy Initiative, where they mentioned that in 2021 to 2022, 94% of all climate finance for methane abatement in the waste sector went to waste to energy incineration. And this is very alarming. In fact, this is reflected in the approach as we're seeing taken by multiple international financial institutions or multiple multilateral development banks like the Asian Development Bank, which has its headquarters in the Philippines. They claim to take a technology agnostic approach in dealing with climate, energy, and waste. But as we are seeing with this report and many other evidences, the needle is really tipping towards waste to energy as not as a false solution to climate and to waste. I'd like to end by mentioning that, or reminding rather, that in the Philippines, waste to energy incineration has been banned for the past 25 years. But throughout these 25 years, we've seen over a dozen different waste to energy plants pop up all over the country. We have listed around 20 proposals, some of which are registered or are recognized by the Department of Energy. And we would like to take this platform to call out our concern and our hope that waste to energy will not be included in our energy plans, in our climate plans, or in plans such as the nationally determined contributions, which are now being updated. One last thing I'd like to mention is as we talk about solutions, as we talk about zero waste, I'd like to give a little shout out to the 90,000 informal waste workers who are really doing the bulk of the work in cleaning up Quezon City. Many of them earn very minimal wages. And just as was highlighted earlier, most of the waste in the Philippines and in many countries in the global south, because most of the waste is organic, there's huge potential in composting and anaerobic digestion. But I'd also like to point out that because there are tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of waste workers who are already doing good work in the global south, there's also huge potential if we invest in them. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much, Brex. Now to hear the perspective from Brazil, joining us is Rafael Eudes from Zero Waste Alliance Brazil.
Hello, everyone, and thanks so much for the opportunity to speak and to bring perspective on the study. The new report comes as a well-established evidence of the impacts of the incineration in Brazil and in Latin America region, and on how we should move towards the implementation of the cumulative benefits of zero waste approaches. As recycling and composting solutions are presented in the study as a technically and economically viable solutions in our context, the ongoing projects in Brazil for the implementation of incineration can compromise the country's climate efforts, especially considering the leadership needed for Brazil as the COP30 host. In Barueri, according to local organizations, the incineration project under construction is located in an area already marked by high levels of pollution. And in addition to all the evidence presented in the study, the incineration project creates a challenge for the work of thousands of waste pickers and contradicts the national solid waste policy, which prioritizes reduction, reuse, recycling, and composting over incineration. At the national level, our Congress had an increase of incineration financing bills, and this study could help policymakers gain a clear understanding of the long-term climate benefits of zero waste strategies. More than 10 states are now in Brazil implementing composting solutions in the municipalities. These efforts establish compostable organic waste as an economic and social asset, generating jobs, income, and promoting civic engagement. As a COP30 host, Brazil will reaffirm its leadership by rejecting incinerations that could harm trust in the country's climate ambitions, and instead, the country should promote zero waste efforts to meet its climate commitments related to the emissions from the waste sector. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Rafael. And now we will open the floor for questions. We have journalists in our room, and of course, those who are watching us on LinkedIn Live, you may also post your question in the comment section and we will read it from there. Do we have questions? Okay, maybe just to get the ball rolling with our question, I have one question for Neil. So Neil, given the results presented on the merits of going zero waste versus business as usual and incineration, why are policymakers still pursuing incineration? I think that's a question that all of us in the room and those in LinkedIn are asking.
That's an excellent question. Here at Climate Week, we see that the papers submitted by Japan and the Arab group are both calling for waste to energy. And in Japan, we know that this is in part because it is an export market. Japan sells incinerators abroad, and they are looking to build that market. And I think it's quite unfortunate that that is taking precedence over what is best for the climate and for human health. I also think that there's perhaps a more human reason, which is that waste is usually handled by sanitation engineers, and sanitation engineers are trained to build machines that address problems. And so the more complex the waste, the bigger the problem, the more difficult the problem, the more complex the machinery. But waste is really more a human issue to be dealt with. We can deal with it without high technology, using source separation, age-old practices like compost, as well as restrictions and bans on some problematic materials, I think we need a shift in mindset, I think, rather than seeing waste as merely a disposal problem, to really looking at the beneficial uses. And of course, there's always the financial aspect to be looked at.
So much, Neil. Do we have questions from our journalists in the room? There's one from Merit. Could we hear some more about the Addis Ababa WTE case, who proposed it, how long it took before it became operational, and other relevant information?
Yes, I can step in to answer that one. Sorry, for some reason my video is not working, but I hope you can hear me okay. So the question was about that waste energy incinerator. So in terms of who proposed it, I believe the government was approached by different entities. I'm not exactly sure who proposed the idea first, but there was a consulting firm from the UK that was working with a few local actors that looked at the problem that we had at our landfill site in the capital city. Yes, there was a huge problem because the landfill was not being properly managed. Waste was not obviously source segregated, so everything was being accumulated in the landfill was in operation for decades, so it was turning into a small mountain of waste. So there was an interest from the city administration to find sustainable solutions, but they were not themselves looking at incineration in the beginning. So this was an technology that was introduced by foreign entities that wanted to implement the project in Ethiopia. Like I said, the city administration did not have also the finance for this project. So the finance was also provided based on loans from the Chinese government. So the funds were raised in terms of loans. So that's also another justification to rethink incinerators in countries in developing countries like mine because they don't exactly fit into the resources we have on the ground. So in terms of how long it took before it came into operation, I believe construction was started in 2014 and completed in 2018. And so it took around 4 years in terms of planning and construction. And the idea for the incinerator when it was being planned was for it to generate 50 megawatts of electricity. Then finally, it was said that 50 megawatts of electricity is not going to be produced. It was going to be 25 in terms of the capacity. And then there was also an issue in terms of running it right now. So it was generating less than 10 megawatts of electricity currently because an incinerator is complicated not only to build, but also to run. So it requires a lot of inputs in terms of spare parts and chemicals to subdue the emissions that are produced as a part of the incineration in converting the waste into energy. So I hope it adds a little background and answers the question from Marit. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Eskedar. Merit, do you have follow-up questions? There's one question here from Lucien. Lucien, would you like to, at least for the benefit of those watching from LinkedIn, I will read the question and maybe Neil, you can explain it again. So the case of Brazil may appear to suggest that incineration has the potential to rival zero waste strategies, particularly when considering the possibility of enhanced research and developments in incinerator technologies. Why are the key reasons that explain the situation compared to the other countries?
Yeah, so this was really a quirk of the modeling situation. As I mentioned earlier, waste from a major metropolitan area, right? So Quezon City or Lagos would require several incinerators. And the Barueri incinerator is not being built to handle only Barueri's waste, but also a portion of São Paulo's waste. But in São Paulo, we also have waste pickers operating. They're increasingly handling organics. We also have a variety of different landfill situations, some with landfill gas collection, some without. We don't really know how efficient that landfill gas collection system is. So from a modeling perspective, it became very challenging to create a realistic baseline for the Barueri incinerator. So we said, well, let us take sort of the best possible case, only going to burn Barueri's waste. And in reality, nobody is going to build an incinerator that large for a town of that size. It's over capacity. And so it looks relatively good because it's an overcapacity incinerator. It can handle all of the organic waste. So you'll have no methane emissions. But it's really, as I was saying, it's not a realistic scenario. So it's not that the incinerator is better or really that we expect any improvements in incinerator processes. It's kind of a quirk of the modeling situation.
So much, Neil. Are there other questions? Perhaps let's go back to some of our panel reactors. Let's look at the case of Lagos. Weyinmi, can you tell us what is the current situation now? It was all over the news last year. So how are things now in the case of the Lagos incinerators?
All right, thank you very much. So in Lagos, on the 29th of May last year, we got an announcement from the Lagos state government that they have signed an agreement with a Dutch firm to build an incinerator, to build a waste-to-energy incinerator with a company called Harvest Waste Consortium, who have a knack for building incinerators in developing countries or the global south. So we sent, first of all, we tried to reach out to the Lagos state government to have to have a communications with them to make them see reasons why this is not the right step to take. But all efforts proved abortive. We also had a sign-on. We had we collaborate. We reached out to several non-profit organizations. We had a sign-on letter that we sent to the government, and over 146 organizations signed to this letter. And this was made up of 251 environmental justice advocates from 64 countries globally. Afterwards, we also promised to have a meeting with the Lagos state government, but at the end of the day, we still could not have this conversation, but we have sent this privately. We have sent our message publicly to them, writing, like taking our time to write our steps why this is not the way to go for the Lagos state government. And we also had a press briefing as well. So we've had some reactions, but we also know that the government and the company are keeping this document, these agreements very secret, which is not, we don't believe that's even the way to go. So you cannot even access the details of the agreements that was made between this company and the government. So for now, that's where we are at, and things are laying low or quiet, but I believe they still have the intention. And this is my worry for Africa. When I was listening to Eskedar, he made mention of something that Ethiopia did not, or the city of Addis did not even have the money to install these incinerators. And we know incinerators are very expensive. They're very expensive, they don't even work, and even the waste management, the waste still remains. So if we're not careful, and it's something I really want us to really, we need to pay a serious attention to, is if we're not careful with this, especially in Africa, in the next coming years, we're going to see a lot of cities go into debt for a technology they don't even need, unfortunately. At this junction, I would say for those who are at the center of climate finance, especially in the waste sector, we really need to speak against the financing of these false solutions. And like I keep saying, for Africa, unfortunately, some of these cities are just looking for a solution. Municipalities, they don't know good or bad. They just think someone claimed this is a solution. And so that's why we need everyone to really hear about zero waste as a solution, because cities are just clamoring for anything. And when someone lies to them, someone gives them a false information, they just believe it, unfortunately. But we are working to ensure that Africa and Nigeria will not find themselves in a debt for what they really never needed in the first place. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Weyinmi. So you mentioned most of these technologies are actually coming from the global north. Can someone from our panel of speakers share more about this? Like what's happening here? Why are all these technologies being sent to the global south? Mariel?
Yeah, let me jump in here. Thank you, Sonia. So coming from Europe, I have had the chance to watch closely the trends here in this region. And it is true that European countries, especially in the north, the rich countries in Europe, Scandinavia, Germany, Denmark, these countries some decades ago have done great investments in incineration technology. And this was a result of policies that were trying to divert waste from landfills, which was seen as the worst evil. And yet there were no measures to control the damage of incinerators. And there was a big expansion of incinerators. And nowadays we see that in these countries, there's still a lot of incinerators, but because this investment and this infrastructure was so heavy for so many years, it's become a situation of having overcapacity. Overcapacity, and also it's been very clear how incinerators pose a real obstacle to advance the agenda for circular economy and for climate action. And what we've seen in the last 10 years is Scandinavia, Denmark, Germany, and the whole of the European Union actually moving away from incineration. And we've seen Denmark specifically, a country that is the top country incinerator in Europe. They've passed legislation to decommission incinerators, up to 7 incinerators that they plan to be decommissioned because they are absolutely incompatible with the climate policies, the climate commitments that Denmark has nowadays. European Union passed the sustainable finance taxonomy, and it excluded incineration as an activity that would deserve sustainable finance precisely because it's an obstacle to circular economy and climate action. And yet, there is still an industry that is needing a market to sell incinerators. And Neil was referring to that when we was talking about Japan trying to export incinerators, export technology to the global south. There's a number of industries, and often with the support of governments in the global north, that are taking advantage of the situation that is happening in the global south that Weyinmi was talking about, cities that are overwhelmed with the waste crisis, with the climate crisis, and they're looking for solutions. Of what they hear, what they receive is this propaganda from global north selling incinerators to the global south. We need to put this in the context of global climate finance and the climate negotiations that are happening now in Addis and will be happening at COP30. And let's also take the step back and remember that in the last COP, at COP29, there was a big commitment and a big fight for Global South to be getting finance from the Global North for precisely to mitigate and adapt to climate change. We are in the midst of a very important negotiation, financial negotiation, because the Global South is owed a climate debt. It's the North, it's the rich countries in the North that are responsible for the global warming that we are seeing today, that we're seeing already impacts all over the world. And it's the Global South, the countries in the Global South that owe this debt and that deserve and need this money to make sure that they develop sustainably. This was a key topic for the negotiations at COP29. This will continue to be an incredible fight at COP30 and beyond, because climate change is not going to go away and the impacts are going to keep hitting the most vulnerable, the people that deserve it the least in the whole world. And yet what we're seeing is not the level of finance from the global north giving to the global south. What we're seeing is the Netherlands trying to sell an incinerator in Lagos, Japan trying to sell incinerators in the second climate week. Who was involved in the Addis Ababa incinerator? It was a UK company, and so on, and so on, and so on. So this is very much a betrayal of the commitments that Global North has to the Global South in repairing the climate debt that is owed, and incinerator industries are in the forefront of this greenwashing. We really need to reverse the trend, precisely because it's in Europe that we're seeing that even the European institutions are realizing of how much incinerators are really not the way to go. So it's not only just the local communities and, if you want, the NGOs that are speaking the truth about incinerators, is actually European Union the European Investment Bank and other financial mechanisms that have moved away from incinerators because they are completely incompatible with incinerators. It's real double standard that the North is doing here. And we really want for everyone in the Global South, for all these governments and cities that are desperately needing solutions, to really hear that the solutions are in the zero waste field, and that we are here to work with them to make sure that we can implement solutions that work for the people, that work for the climate, and that work for a sustainable future.
Thank you so much, Mariel. Do we have questions? Hearing what Mariel said. No. Oh, okay. Neil wants. Okay.
I just wanted to follow on Mariel's points. I think this is an opportunity for the Global South to leapfrog the Global North. This is not a time to catch up, which would mean replicating the mistakes that the Global North has made in terms of overconsumption, excessive waste generation, the amount of food waste in the Global North, the amount of plastic that is used are horrendous. And to invest huge amounts of money in waste disposal infrastructure. And then, as Mariel was describing, having done all that, built all that capacity, then slowly starting to introduce source separation, composting, recycling, you realize that you've really locked yourself into these false solutions. This is an opportunity for the Global South to choose a different path, one that is far better for the climate. It is far better for human health. It is better for society. And by the way, it does happen to be a lot cheaper. And so it's far more cost effective. And given the fact that the Global North is not coming up with the necessary climate finance, it is important to find those cost effective solutions. And zero waste is one of those.
Thank you so much, Neil. There are no more questions. I would like to request our panelists again if you have last words, or maybe we have viewers who are not policymakers. So what can ordinary people do to support zero waste? How can we push our policymakers to choose zero waste versus incineration? Okay, Eskedar.
Thank you. I think one thing that needs to be underlined, especially from explaining the context from the Global South perspective, is that the challenge in the urban areas, the challenge that comes from waste management is a real issue, and we need a solution. So when we are talking about moving away from incinerator, we should not stop the conversation there. We have to make sure that we continue to converse the conversation and say we have more productive solutions that are, as has been stated, a lot more affordable, a lot more compatible to what we have already on the ground, that actually go with enriching the communities that are working in the waste sector. Right now, for example, with our organization in our city, we have been trying to get a zero waste pilot project off the ground, and we have everything aligned. We're just missing one thing. And that thing that's creating the challenge is the fact that right now the waste collectors that are transporting waste from the neighborhoods to the landfill sites, their payment is based on the weight of the waste they actually deliver at the incinerators. That's where we have the track weight measuring system. And that's also where the city decided to calculate how much money each waste collecting SMEs would get. Because of that, the existence of that system, we are now having a difficulty running a zero waste pilot project in different neighborhoods in Addis Ababa, because the waste collectors will not be paid for the waste they will divert and leave for us to manage on site. So this is exactly the practical example of what the lock-in effect I believe Neil was talking about earlier actually means when it's implemented on the ground. Therefore, going forward, it's very important when we are having conversations around the incinerator to acknowledge, yes, waste management is a huge problem in the Global South, in urban cities, as we have an exponentially growing population there, a huge amount of waste that is being accumulated. But instead of incinerators, the approach of zero waste are the right way to go, because we can actually implement them. We can actually empower the communities around them and yield better results for a much lower budget.
Thank you so much, Eskedar. Weyinmi?
Thanks, Sonia. So when it comes to advancing zero waste in Africa, I feel like the real challenge is not a lack of solutions, but a combination of perception, priorities, and a political will. And there's a narrative gap where zero waste is still wrongly perceived as an idealistic or community scale concept. Rather, it is a proven model that works. It creates jobs, it cuts costs, and it is climate friendly, good for environment, good for public health as well. And so we need a political will, and I'll just say finally, just for the sake of time, that the task before us is to reframe zero waste, not as an alternative, but as the most economically rational, social, just, and climate resilient pathway for Africa. And I feel like that's what this report has done. And so that when policymakers see that zero waste is not about, first of all, we are saying no to incinerators, but it's something that is also good for the economy and for the municipality. And then they begin to listen differently. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Weyinmi. Brex?
Thanks very much. And I do agree with my colleagues that zero waste is a solution and a barrier to any future incineration proposals. I also agree with Weyinmi about what he said about perception. In fact, where I come from, waste workers are seen as dirty. They're seen as the opposite of a solution, or people who are doing good for. At the same time, we are seeing these little pockets of zero waste popping up at the lowest levels of government in our barangays in the Philippines. And my call is I hope that we will continue to build and support these models towards more zero waste cities. From barangays, we hope that they can multiply towards zero waste cities. And the other hope is that different cities that have already adopted zero waste can continue to network with each other and promote zero waste as a solution to their fellow city governments. One last thing I'd like to mention is on a related note, the climate here in the Philippines, waste energy is being promoted as a flooding solution. Vis-a-vis, you take away the waste that's clogging up in the waterways, you solve flooding. And we are seeing how waste to energy is sort of becoming a platform for the convergence of different issues. Climate change, flooding, right now in Manila, housing, because there are many waste workers' homes that are being demolished and being forcefully evicted as we speak. And I hope that this platform can shine some light on that and show another point as to why incineration should not be pursued as a climate solution, and also as any type of solution for anything, for that matter. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much, Brex. Rafael?
Yes, thanks so much for this event. I would say, and I would agree with the other panelists, as a Latin American speaker, yes, we have a huge problem of waste management, but the solutions already exist, and the scalability of zero waste shows the path we should move towards addressing the climate solutions needed for our region and for our country. And especially talking about the case of Brazil, have 800,000 of waste pickers at least. And implementing zero waste solution is also implementing a better condition for the waste pickers that have such a huge whole in solving the waste issues in Brazil and also the climate issues that we have. And also, I would end saying that policymakers will have a great example in Belém, the city where the COP30 will be hosted, because there's a new public composting unit being installed in that city of Belém with the capacity of 800 tons of organic waste to be processed per month. So the solutions are already being implemented, and they indicated the direction and the path that we need to attain our climate goals, not just only in Brazil, but also in the region of the Latin America. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much to all our speakers or panelists and to those who join us. So thank you for joining this press conference. As mentioned earlier, we have two other publications as part of this GAIA Technical Guidance Series for policymakers and financiers on fast action on waste and methane. Visit no-burn.org/techguide-waste-methane. So as we have heard from our speakers, the solution exists. It's in our hands and at our disposal. It's compatible with the local context. It's affordable. It creates job and it's easy to scale. But we need political will. We need to reframe that zero waste is not just an alternative, but the real solution. And we need a management system that puts at the center people, their community experience and expertise, science, and fast action. This is how we leave no one behind. Thank you so much, everyone, and have a great day.